And so you were asked, one question I asked you is, would you approve Milgram's study given what you now know about IRB? And of course I gave you a little video to show you what Milgram's study was about. And I also gave you a lot of content on IRB. So you should have been well prepared to answer this question as you did your reading and studied this content. And here's a student response that has some good aspects and some things that gave me pause. So I wanted to bring this one forward, and there were other similar answers. So this is not picking on any one student. Just one just kind of came out. So the student wrote, if I were a member of the IRB and had responsibilities of approving the Milgram study, choices are, I think the student meant to write chances are, I would not approve it. The study did not have enough research materials to be moved on. The Milgram study did not do an informed consent to the people that were involved to participate in the study. Those shocks would have killed the participants, and Milgram still wanted to move forward with the questions he had asked to his participants, and he also wanted to move on with the shocks. He would have killed many people while doing this experiment. I would not approve Milgram's experiment. And so, my gosh, I certainly hope that none of you would have improved an experiment that would have involved killing participants. So let's get some things clear. So here are some things that I thought were sort of good. The person mentioned, being a member of the IRB, so was, kind of addressing the key point of the question, bringing forward that this is about the IRB. This person also mentioned informed consent, showing that he or she knew that informed consent is part of the process. And then, as I said earlier, any study that would have killed people should definitely be a no. The thing that gave me pause about this, there were a couple things. Well, there's a little evidence of carelessness, like choices are instead of chances are, and missing, this person, didn't have time to reread, I guess, and make sure. I couldn't quite make sense of what this meant. They didn't have enough research materials to be moved on. I was trying to think, well, what do we mean by research materials? Like, they had that machine, they had the whole protocol set up. Like, what did this person mean by research materials? So this statement wasn't clear to me. Correct, the Milgram study did not do an informed consent, and as you know from your reading, it was in fact this study that led to these protections. So this was done in the early days. So they didn't do informed consent because that wasn't part of the rules back then, but now it is because of this study. This person finally seems to think that the study didn't take place because this is all written in the hypothetical. The shocks would have killed the participants, and Milgram still wanted to move forward. He would have killed many people. And so this suggests that the study didn't happen, but the study did happen. And most greatest concern in this, and as I said, this is not the only response that was like this, is the student doesn't seem to realize that no shocks were administered and nobody died. And so then when I read this, you can imagine from my perspective, I'm thinking, this person has some idea of what the IRB is, but this person doesn't understand the Milgram study or how the Milgram study impacted the formation of the protections, the human rights protections that we have. So you can see how it would be hard for me to give a lot of points for this because there's a lack of understanding of the two fundamental concepts. So because this wasn't the only person who didn't understand the Milgram study, I just want to reiterate on the next slide. So I wanted to make sure that you guys understood the study, and some of you really did show that you understood the study. You, let's see if we can get this to move forward. Take the pen off here. Okay, some of you understood and you realized that no person was actually shocked and that the shock machine was a fake, right? Some of you had a really good understanding of this. And others of you believed the shock machine was real and that people were harmed or killed. And this is absolutely not true. So nobody was physically harmed. Nobody. There was the use of a confederate. A confederate is an actor who pretended to be harmed. There was the use of deception. Participants were misled about what the study was about. There was the use of a gadget that appeared to be a shock machine but wasn't. And there was a debriefing afterwards. Another student asked about these terms. It's a very good question the student asked, and so I'll clarify these later. But everybody, no one was hurt physically in this study. And if you had watched that short video, just a short bit of your time, I think it was 6 minutes long, they would have made that very clear. But I think sometimes, this student and maybe others of you who didn't understand the study just did like a Google search and didn't really seek to understand the study. So the ethical concerns about this study and why it was so pivotal in getting human rights protections in place is not because people were shocked. No, nobody was shocked. But it was because of the distress experienced by those participants who went ahead and pressed the button indicating that if it had been real, they would have shocked people on command. So that's what the big deal was. It was this psychological distress caused by someone who says, wow, I pushed this button all the way up to 450 volts, which could have killed someone. Nobody got killed, but that was me. I pushed that button. That was the distress that was concerning. And so in response to this, most of you, everyone, responded that they wouldn't have approved the study, and you're right, it shouldn't have been approved. But I want to offer a little broader perspective on this. If you're on the IRB, you have to say no. But as a human being, we can think about it a little more broadly. And so we know nobody was physically harmed. We know that were participants distressed? The answer is yes. Were participants harmed? And this is where we have this little gray area, I think. It's less clear. And we often know that sometimes our most difficult experiences are the ones that benefit us the most. And so participants who were interviewed after the study, and again many years later, said they had learned something from the study. They had learned about themselves and they benefited from it, and they weren't angry with Milgram for doing it. And so we just have to think as human beings, not as IRB members, that these distressing experiences are the cost, but sometimes the benefit, the learning benefit from such things are worth it. So the IRB would and should reject the study today, I'm quite certain, just like you rejected it in your responses, but I wanted to give you that food for thought. So we are on to the student questions, and the first one asked about deception in research, and the student wrote, a question that I have that got me confused was the difference between debriefing and deception. A very good question, so let me clarify. Deception is misleading or lying. We use the word deceiving, it's lying to participants so that a psychological response can be elicited. Any study like a medical trial, they're giving some people the medicine and other people a control. They're telling people you might have the medicine or you might have the control, but they're not telling the whole truth, right? And sometimes that's the only way we can conduct a study. So we know Milgram misled subjects by telling them they were shocking someone when they weren't. Milgram had a machine that looked like a shock machine, and he told subjects it was real. Milgram had a confederate or an actor who was pretending to be hurt. All this was deception. And it's sketchy, but sometimes it's necessary. So think about if Milgram had fully disclosed the purpose of the study. He would have said this. He would have had to say, we have a fake shock machine here and a man in another room who is an actor. We want you to push the fake button every time he makes a mistake, and the man will cry out, but he won't really be hurt. We are trying to find out how far you will go in harming another person if directed to do so by an authority figure. Well, if you know you're not hurting someone, then the researchers can't find anything out. In order to find out how far people will go and to help us understand how normal everyday people could have committed the atrocities in World War II, we have to have the participants believe that they're hurting people, that they're hurting someone. That was the only way to answer the question. And so, just so you understand in order to test most hypotheses, there has to be some level of deception, even if it's just deception by omission, not telling someone whether they're getting a real medicine or a fake medicine. But in order to get it through the IRB, the person has to justify the need for the deception. So in the IRB, the researcher would have to make the case that the deception is necessary and that the benefits will outweigh the costs. And that's what you guys had to weigh out when I asked you that question. And if we were in a classroom, we could have a big debate about it. And I could play devil's advocate. And I sure do miss the classroom, you guys. Okay, next we talked about deception, so then debriefing, the other term of confusion. So debriefing is a general term that means talking about aspects of an event after it has passed. Like it comes from spy times, you know, if you were a spy, you'd go back and you'd tell your boss everything you learned. But sometimes we even think about it when someone, let's say you're a doctor and you've just been helping tons and tons of people in a really difficult situation, and you might be experiencing a lot of distress from all the harmed people that you saw. Well, you might engage in a debriefing afterwards just to help you hash through the psychological impact of what you just went through with all these people. So it kind of means that. So when we use deception, when we mislead people in a research study, we have to debrief them afterwards to make sure they understand what happened. And what will happen in the debriefing is the person who sits down with the subject will explain the true purpose of this experiment. So in the Milgram study, they would sit down and say, nobody was really shocked. You didn't harm anybody. Everything was faked. This is what we were trying to discover. They would ensure that each participant knows the role of if there's a Confederate, if any. In the case of Milgram, they brought the Confederate out, they shook hands, they talked, they laughed, they met the Confederate, so they knew they hadn't harmed him. And then you allow the participants to express their feelings, to talk about it, to debrief, to express what their experience was during that experiment. And as they do that, usually any distress they feel will dissolve. And so then the researcher who's doing the debriefing would make sure that they've recovered from any distress they felt earlier. And if the researcher who was talking and doing the debriefing was concerned, they would offer professional psychological support. So we don't just leave subjects and abandon them if they participate in our study and somehow that study distressed them. Now, as we know, this study wouldn't likely happen today. But that's what debriefing does, and there is still deception today in experiments. So just to clarify, deception is the original lie, we'll just say it frankly, and the debriefing is the truth told after the study. Okay, another question, another student asked, I'd like to know and learn more ways to look through articles so we can easily identify the DV and look at the conceptual definition. And so I think this is a really good question. Research articles are so hard to read. And a person has to be efficient. You can't read every word. You have to know how it's structured so that you can find what you need. So remember the structure. Research articles are going to start with an introduction and literature review. The author is going to tell you in that first section about previous research on this topic, and at the end of this section, they're going to state their hypothesis, very likely. Now, this hypothesis is a good place to look for your dependent variable. So it's going to be right at the end of the lit review in the last paragraphs before the heading methods. And so if you just go back, you find the word methods, and then you go back a paragraph or two before it, you should find the researcher telling us about their hypothesis, and that'll help you pick out the DV. Now this person's asking about the conceptual definition. Sometimes right at the start of the article, the researchers will state their definition. That's great. More often you have to infer it. And so you can kind of read through the case they're building and say, I think that they're defining it in this way. So you're going to infer it. So after the introduction and lit review, where you can find your DV, you come to the methods section, and that tells you all the details about the study, who was in it, how it was conducted, what they did, and that will tell you how they operationalized or measured their DV. You know, and usually it'll give you a lot of detail. And then you get the results. And this is like statistical numbers. And usually for undergrads who haven't had good background in statistics, it's hard to understand and it doesn't make much sense. Sometimes there'll be a nice graph that can help. Usually they're telling you statistical results that you don't know yet. So look at it, but don't be frustrated that you don't understand the results. Go to the discussion, and that's where the authors will make sense of the results and explain them in easier language. And they'll link it to previous research and tell you why it's important. So this section will be easy to understand. This will be fun, kind of, if you like reading about research studies. And this will help you to understand the purpose of the study, and this will help you to ground it in previous research. So a very good question. As I mentioned in my previous long time lecture, I'm not going to be asking you to read too many research articles each week, but you are going to have to read them once you get to your our midterm week. So I hope you're gathering research articles on your topic and so forth. All right, the next question wrote, I'd like to know more about how they picked, this is referring to the Klein-Smith, the gun testosterone aggression study. And he says, I would like to know more about how they picked the 30 male college-age students with the age range of 18 to 22. Were they selected randomly, or were they picked by the people conducting the study of aggression? So this is a good question. And a lot of this you can find, right in the method section. Like, look at this. It doesn't tell us the answer to his question exactly, but we get a hint. 30 male college students, so we know they're college students, and they received extra course credit or a small monetary reward for their participations. And they were run at the same time of day. It also says, when recruited, subjects were informed that the study would examine taste sensitivity in males, and they would therefore need to provide saliva for hormone analysis. All right, so that is deception, right? That's not what they were really looking at, right? But if they had told their participants, we're looking to see how much hot spice you give someone, after your testosterone changes. No. It wouldn't work. They had to use deception. But that's what they told people. And then down here they describe exactly how it's done. They said it was a female experimenter and, so forth. So the way they got these, undoubtedly, is something that happens in big universities. So if you were going to ASU or UA, you would be taking an intro psych course. And in that course, part of your responsibility would be to participate in one or more research studies being conducted in the labs on campus. And then all of these studies would be posted to you. It would come to your email, or you'd see them on the bulletin boards near the classrooms. And then you'd have a chance to choose which ones you want to participate in, or which one, depending on the credit. And, you would either receive extra credit or a little monetary award for participating. So that's typically how they're gotten in these types of studies. So I hope that answers your question. They were voluntary, not random. So, random selection isn't as important when we're doing random assignment, as you'll learn about in your chapter on experimentation. All right, so to summarize, read carefully, watch the lectures and review the slides. No outside resources in your answers unless I ask you to provide one. No, do not do a web search and give me a web citation. No outside resources unless I tell you we need an outside resource for this. I won't grade your work if you do it with outside resources. Take notes when you're watching the lectures. You'll learn it so much better than just passively reading those slides. And then ask questions. I love answering student questions. I love it. It makes me so happy. So ask questions. And also, we're trying to do these Tuesday classes. I will deliver some lecture content, probably not all of it. So you'll probably have to watch some of it online, and you'll have a chance to talk about your research. And this is really the heart of what makes this a rich class. I'd like to form a little community who's regularly coming to that classroom. And if not in the classroom, at least joining on Zoom with your face and your presence. So this is what I would ask of you. if you can. I know some of you can't. All right, I hope this is helpful, and thanks for all your input. That will help me to keep making this a better class and meeting your needs as students. I appreciate that.